What is MSG? So some of us have heard about MSG, but if you've never heard about it, you've definitely tasted it in food. So today we're going to learn about what MSG is and then some controversy surrounding this compound. So let's get into it. First of all, MSG stands for monosodium glutamate. Let's break that down. Mono means one. Sodium. Sodium is in like table salt, sodium chloride. Okay. So we got one sodium and a glutamate. Okay, so here's our one sodium here. And then we have our glutamate. So let's briefly talk about how this even got together, how these two things got to know each other. So MSG is created by a reaction between glutamic acid, which is this one right here, and sodium. So we already have our one sodium. The differences between glutamic acid and glutamate are very simple, and you can see them if I point them out. Glutamate is basically a glutamic acid without this little hydrogen. This H is a hydrogen. So if you take away this hydrogen, then all of a sudden this oxygen gets a little charge on it. Don't worry too much about that. And this sodium's gonna come in and stick right on here. So when you take away this hydrogen, this glutamate becomes, well, this glutamic acid becomes glutamate. And then this sodium attaches right here, and then you get monosodium glutamate. Glutamate is glutamic acid without the hydrogen, right? It has this negative. And we have one sodium that connects to it, so we get monosodium glutamate. There are different forms of glutamate. I'm not going to get into all these. I don't want to confuse anyone, but that's what it is. So glutamate is let's make this a little even. It's a neurotransmitter. And that's just a chemical messenger in the brain. I don't want to get deep into it because that's another video. It's also a white crystalline solid if you extract it and purify it. And it's used as a flavor enhancer in food. Now you can enhance the food with this itself, but it's present in a lot of foods naturally, and that's what I'm going to get into right now. So some facts and controversy. All right, facts first. Glutamate. If glutamate's not connected to anything, it's called free. Free glutamate produces this umami flavor. Umami is kind of hard to describe. It's a savory. So Parmesan cheese, soy sauce, oyster sauce, aged foods, dry aged steak, cured ham, mushrooms. Mushrooms are full of MSG, which is why they got that savory taste. It's hard to describe, but you know what I mean. Glutamate is the most abundant amino acid, but it's non-essential, as in it's made in our bodies naturally, so we don't need it. Other amino acids, the essential ones, we need them to make proteins and do stuff like that, right? They're the building blocks of proteins, right? They're like Legos that connect and make these proteins, and these proteins do certain things, but that's another video. So that's what glutamate is. When this MSG is broken down, glutamate frees up, and it's like this. You got free glutamate just floating around, and it hits our tongue, and boom, you got that beautiful flavor. Let's talk about some controversy. So in the 1960s, a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine reported on a term called Chinese restaurant syndrome. It's a terrible phrase. It created this really negative view of Chinese food, Chinese people, a lot of discrimination. It's based in absolute trash, in my opinion. I'm going to describe to you why this syndrome isn't really a syndrome. After consumption of Chinese food, a lot of people complained of headaches, flushing, drowsiness. Some people talked about cholesterol and all kinds of stuff. And then all this stuff started coming out in the media. Right, we got this book, In Bad Taste, the MSG syndrome, the symptoms, the dangers, the latest findings. You had some doctors on here, so you know it's true, right? Okay. But in fact, there is no definitive evidence of harm from MSG. When it comes to anything, any information that we take in, we always gotta question it in a healthy way and figure out if it's true or not. And this is what I'm gonna do today. So the science is really up for debate with MSG. And here's why. Some pretty clear things going on. One, there's so many flaws in these trials. When they did these clinical trials on humans, mostly on rats, as I'll talk about, you can't really come up with any conclusions. Okay, so they gave these rats crazy high doses of MSG. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, they loaded these rats up with MSG to the point where they got a lot of severe symptoms. But that makes a lot of sense because too much of anything is a bad thing. So incredibly high doses, a lot of this data is based on mice. Mice are used as models to test drugs because they got similar organ systems and stuff going on like humans do, but you can't draw conclusions off of mice data. That's just not how things work, especially from an unknown. So it's a lot of rodent-based data. Again, it's not suggestive of effectiveness in humans. Then there's some inconsistencies with dosage. So when you do research studies involving drugs, you gotta have a consistent dosage, and you gotta have a consistent route. Like, do you drink it? Is it a pill? Do you inject it? These studies, the dosages are all over the place. Even with the rats, I mean, you're talking about 1,000, 4,000, 3,000. It's like, come on, like, you gotta be consistent. And even with people, like I'm gonna say here, even when the sample size is really small, which is an issue, the dosages are all over the place. Sample size is way too small, too few people in a study can skew data. You can't make a decision on how effective something is based on like 30 people. You really want a lot, hundreds if not thousands. Then some extras. Well, people complained of headaches after consuming Chinese food. All right, there's no impact on headache. I'm gonna post a really nice meta-analysis under this video description. A meta-analysis is a research paper that studies a bunch of other research papers to draw conclusions. And what's interesting is that the body doesn't discriminate between glutamate in food versus added glutamate. If you add MSG in that crystal form to food, you actually get a lower amount of MSG than you would if you ate food itself that had MSG. So what I'm saying is that if MSG was so harmful, you would get all these symptoms, flushing, headache, all this stuff from just eating a bunch of mushrooms or some ketchup or a lot of cheese, but you don't. And that's fact. The body does not discriminate. Glutamate is glutamate. But unfortunately, a lot of conclusions have been made when the data is it's trash. It doesn't make sense. You can't draw conclusions based on such inconsistent numbers and inconsistent data points. So in summary, MSG is monosodium glutamate. We talked about how it's 1 sodium plus glutamate. And that happens from a reaction between glutamic acid and sodium. The difference between glutamic acid and glutamate, we said, was this. You take away this hydrogen, you get a negative sign. And now they're the same. Hold on, let me just change this. Glutamate can have different forms. We're just gonna stick with this one. Now they're the same. This is the same as this. Once this happens, that glutamic acid now becomes glutamate. And when we attach that sodium to it, it now becomes mono 1 sodium, sodium glutamate. Then we talked about glutamate, how it's a neurotransmitter. It produces this umami, this savoriness in our mouths, and it's not essential because our body makes it. Then we have this Chinese restaurant syndrome. People complained of headaches, flushing, all kinds of stuff. And it's inconclusive. There's a lot of unnecessary discrimination towards a lot of Chinese people, Asian cuisine, Chinese food. In that time, a lot of people decided not to eat Chinese food, and there's still, unfortunately, a lot of discrimination towards Chinese food because people are so convinced this thing is real. And I showed you guys that with this research data, this whole thing about MSG being terrible for you, it's not based on any facts. The studies are flawed. The data is inconsistent. You got a lot of mouse data, crazy high dosages, not consistent dosages, really low patient population for human beings, a lot of assumed conclusions. In my opinion, it's just bad science. You can't make these decisions and these conclusions off of a compound when you have all this inconsistency. No matter how opinionated someone is, no matter how much they are educated, the numbers don't lie. So that's MSG. As always, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell your friends, and I'll be back soon with another video.